Mic'd up. Hi, Alex. Alex Batlin, founder and CEO of Trustology, is going to talk about the future role of the custodian. And after hearing about the disruption to the transfer agent, I'll be very interested to hear what's going to happen to the role of the custodian.
Mic on, guys? Yeah, there you go. I don't know about you guys, but I was struck listening to Lee, and I know Lee quite well for a few years now. You had a guy called Dr. Brain. I mean, that's like a James Bond kind of thing, villain, telling you that there's this stuff that both exists in 2 states in every state, and you all guys bought it. I mean, come on. He was clearly taking the piss. So with that in mind, I was thinking I would jazz up the presentation and make huge claims, but then I thought I'd probably rein it back in and talk about custody. So let's talk about the future role of custody. My name's Alex, founded Custology, which is a fintech startup. I am looking at securing digital assets and blockchain. We'll talk more what that means about in a second. Why should you listen to me? Well, I was kind of doing a little bit what the previous guy was doing. I ran innovation labs both for UBS and BNY. I founded something called Utility Settlement Coin, which is about 17 banks, which is really digitizing into tokens, central bank money, a lot of liquidity benefits there. And also founded something called Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, about 500 organizations. This is really to make sure that the work we're doing at Utility Settlement Coin, modifying Ethereum, ended up being open source because everyone part of that project was absolutely convinced that this needs to be public good. So that's me. And I was asked to come here and talk about the changing role of custodians. What does that mean? So here's the diagram. It's deliberately, I think it's by Credit Suisse and Citigroup and Bank of America. It's a good diagram. It's actually a simplified version of what we do today. And you'll see on the left and the right, there is a buyer and a seller. And then they have to go through the brokers, the exchanges, the central clearers, and then also the CSDs, the custodians, etc., etc. So look at this. It's really, really complex. At each and every stage, there is an intermediation point. And that's okay, actually. There was a good reason for that. A lot of the time, there was physical distribution involved, and literally people had to be physically present to sign papers and store them. It made a lot of sense to have local distribution points. And then it kind of got digitized, but the structure never really changed. And this gives us kind of delays. Yeah, the more parts that are moving in any system, the likelihood of increasing breakage is quite high. And then what we end up doing is actually thinking through and performing as a custodian does with a global custody services. A lot of things which really makes a lot of sense when you keep constantly retrofitting back to the past and trying to plug the gaps in. And you do all sorts of safekeeping of assets, but what the hell is safekeeping of assets means? Used to be physical safekeeping, made sense. Now we keep a database, that doesn't make sense so much. Settlement of trades, why are we taking 4 days to do settlements? I know why, there are good reasons, because they're historic and all that kind of stuff, but really why? Collecting information, and then also processing actions, corporate actions. Because there's this assumption that you've got this dumb piece of paper that states the rules about what you do to that particular instrument, whether it's pay coupon payments, maturity payments, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really dumb. It's innate, yeah? Unless somebody there, like a custodian, to process all the rules, nothing happens. So what if we turned around and said, this document becomes smart. It can do stuff on its own volition, i.e. the smart contracts, program the flows. And actually, kind of, that's what we did back at UBS when I was still there, kind of. We created a smart bond. Smart bond, we demonstrate how we can issue the bond, then sell the bond and pay coupon payments and pay maturity, all without an intermediary. The intermediary is the smart contract on a blockchain. And all of a sudden, we turned what was actually a dumb instrument into something that's pretty smart. I mean, it's not really smart, but damn, it's smarter than dumb, so it's pretty good. So a lot of people have issue with the word smart contracts. I think they're pretty smart. So anyway, But why are we now seeing this shift away from the previous solution to this new blockchain solution? What is it? There's something behind this revolution. Because really, a lot of the stuff I heard here, you can do with centralized systems. You don't need blockchains, yeah? If you all trust each other, much of the automation we just heard right now, if you just trusted Northern Trust or BNY Mellon or whoever, none of this requires blockchain, not really, because it's just digitalization of process. So why is blockchain slightly bit different? And that's, I believe, because there is a fundamental business model change. We're moving from what I call pipes to platforms. What do I mean by that? Pipes are traditional businesses. You have folks, people, you have resources, and you shove it through this pipe, and then what you end up with is a product, and you sell the product, and that's great. But the amount of stuff you can do is absolutely limited by the number of people you employ in your company. Yep, that's about it. And you serve a very large community. So you have this pipe, and it's narrow, and everyone sits there and gets frustrated. They're not quite getting what they want to do. Now come along these platforms, Google, Uber, Airbnb, Huffington Post, Facebook. They're destroying the previous pipe businesses. Why? Because they're changing the business model. What they're doing is orchestrating external resources. Therefore, they're no longer bound by the kind of resources they control. They're bound by the resources of the entire community. So they have much bigger scale, and they basically dwarf existing pipes. In fact, they're so good at dwarfing everything before, they're now starting to fast become winner-take-all monopolies. Look at Google. We're all a bit scared of them, aren't we? A little bit. They know everything. I've got my phone. They know where I go. You go, oh, my God. You know, I've got this little note from Google giving me memories of where I went for the last 2 weeks. They know where I went for the last 2 weeks. I don't particularly like that. They're a monopoly now, and people get scared of monopolies. But that's a natural progression of a platform, because platforms are really good at dominating. We've seen this time and time again. But blockchain is, again, a little bit different, because why don't we like platforms? Well, we don't like platforms because platforms kind of lead to bad things. Key man risk, or single point of failure. If a centralized system goes down, look at TSB in UK. It went down for 2 days. People will say, I can't feed my babies because I can't pay for milk. It's true. It's pretty bad. NatWest, same. So, okay, that's point one. What else can you do as a monopoly? Well, you can actually dictate terms. Whoever you don't like, you can exclude. Sanctions, and we keep seeing sanctions. Whether you like them or not, but depending on which side of the sanction you are, you might not like it. And you know, I spend a lot of time going around the world in countries that don't trust sanctions, and they're really keen to get off SWIFT because they no longer trust SWIFT. You know, SWIFT has become weaponized by many nations to kind of provide sanctions. Money supply. You know, Bitcoin was created because basically people got fed up with quantitative easing. And I know people tell us that they didn't print money because allegedly, you know, interest rates didn't change. But they did print money, and the average inflation rate for an individual is about 9%, not the headline 2%. So we did inflate money supply, and you now have less money as a result in your pocket than before. So people said, I had enough of it. I want to create a currency where no nation state can inflate my money supply, and that's Bitcoin. Whether you like it or not, it certainly gives you a new capability that we never had before as a world. So that's great. So blockchain starts to actually mitigate some of the typical risks associated with kind of platforms, because what it does is says, look, it's decentralized. If it's decentralized, I don't have single point of failure. So it's okay. Because it has consensus, you can no longer unilaterally sanction somebody without getting consensus, nor can you unilaterally, for instance, inflate money supply unless there's consensus. So actually, people are a lot more comfortable using this across nation-state borders where there is zero trust than before. So that's pretty cool. The other thing, of course, happens to platforms is, take Google. Google wouldn't be powerful if it wasn't for all the websites they index. Well, but who takes all the cash? Google. So most of the value is created by the community network effect. Yet at the same time, what happens? Who collects the cash? Google. So what if you created a platform where whoever creates a lot of value gets to participate in equity creation? Well, that's blockchain. That's called utility tokens. Instead of using money and issuing shares, you have this idea of utility tokens. And if you participate in the network, you earn them. And if the network becomes more valuable, your utility tokens become more valuable. That's pretty cool. In fact, the idea is so strong, we now had Airbnb come out and say they now want to grant equity, not blockchain, but they're trying to match the business model to grant equity to people who issue or who lend out their stuff on the Airbnb. Pretty powerful. They're starting to understand the dynamics behind this. And why is this even more powerful than you kind of think at first? Well, because once people start to compete at the platform level, because the platform takes all the value, you fractionalize the community, and you start to look more like the pipe businesses of old because you compete in platform level. If people feel like they're getting equity in the network creation, then all of a sudden what we're doing is transitioning to a place where people stop competing in the platform. You no longer fractionalize the community, and now you have economies of scale at massive level. And because you now have huge economies of scale, you now have extremely wide-ranging set of needs for the community. And if you can't meet those needs, the community again fragments. Most large, for instance, hedge funds will have 7 or 8 different custodians because no one custodian meets everyone's requirements. So you have to fractionalize your usage, and again, you fractionalize your community. And that's a bad point. What blockchain invented is this idea of smart contract. And to me, this is the transition from mass production, because most of trust services today are mass production. Yeah, you get what you get. If I call our Barclays Bank and say, could you put a new rule on my account and prevent me from spending money after midnight on a Friday night because I might be a little bit drunk? They'll laugh at me and tell me to go away. On blockchain, I can do that. I can deploy a smart contract that controls my spending, and I am free to choose that. Even more importantly, let's say I have a shared account with somebody, and we want to have some rules about how we spend money. Today, if we go to a bank and ask for those rules to be implemented, unless I'm a private client with a load of money, nobody's going to do that for me. On the flip side, I could write the code and put it on Google or Amazon Web Services, but I haven't created trust because I still have admin rights. My counterparty won't trust me. When you put code on blockchain, it becomes autonomous. So I can self-serve trust without actually having to then trust the counterparty to run it. What we're doing effectively through smart contracts being deployed on blockchain is creating virtual custodians out of thin air. And that's pretty magical, actually. We've never had that capability before. I no longer have to wait for somebody else to give me trust. I can self-serve trust. That's extremely empowering. But it also means we can now capture a huge amount of use cases for the underserved and the unserved of this society, roughly 2 billion people in the world. That's massive. Because once we start capturing them, we've now expanded our trust market to the long tail. And there's a really interesting theory called the long tail, which talks about the fact that most people actually don't like mass-produced products. They like customization. It's just they can't afford customization. But if you lower the cost of customization, not only do you capture the bigger community and huge economies of scale, you also at the same time reduce the mass-produced products. Because actually most people don't want them. People want personalized, tailored trust. So that's a big, big shift, and actually it has a really positive social impact as well. Because once we start serving the underserved, who today are excluded from trade because no one's willing to provide trust at an affordable point to them, we now start to create financial inclusion, and that's important. Because all of a sudden, we now let people create wealth because trade creates wealth. And there's a lot of empirical evidence. So I think not only is this cool technology, what's even more amazing, perhaps even more amazing than quantum mechanics, is that we can actually make people's lives better. So if we put all of this together, what could the new architecture look like? And I deliberately used the old boxes, but you'll see it's kind of a lot neater and a lot simpler. And I've got a little bit of OCD, so I quite like neat stuff. So look at this. Basically, most of the functions, the buyer, the seller, the issuer, they're basically using the blockchain as the intermediary. Right now, still loads of people use central exchanges because the decentralized exchanges are not good enough. They're not fast enough for fast trading. That's coming. You'll get there. But now we just removed a lot of the kind of intermediaries. Now notice, I'm not saying we're removing the practices the intermediaries were performing, because innovation is still required. You know, a lot of people talk to me and tell me, oh, so we don't need to do netting anymore because we've got instantaneous settlement. But people forget that netting is not a result of the technology delay. Netting is a result of asymmetry between, in many cases, central bank money and commercial bank money. Yeah? When you have 97-to-3 ratio, there simply isn't enough money, central bank money, to settle many of the transactions, so you have to net. But now you can actually do decentralized netting. I wrote those algorithms. If you want to have automated margin calls for innovation, you can do that. It's pretty goddamn amazing. So what we see is an extremely simplified architecture, and you're now working at even right now, 12-second blocks. Instead of 4 days, you are completely, utterly creating atomic transactions through an entire chain in 12 seconds. So a lot of people say, oh, God, blockchain today, the public blockchain is so slow, it's 12 seconds. Yeah, but we need to compare apples with oranges soon, or apples with apples, because if I told you that the entire settlement of issuance of shares and paying coupons takes you 12 seconds versus 4 days, you go, that's pretty damn good. So people sometimes over-focus on the 12 seconds because everyone is talking about we need to match Visa. But Visa only does a small percentage of that. It does clearing, that's about it. So again, depending on your use case, actually, public blockchains today are good enough. People also talk about privacy and so on. Well, hold on, when I send some money, I give somebody my bank account number, and it goes through loads of networks, and actually loads of people see what I spend. Blockchain, just that. You give me an address, I send some stuff. So people, again, over-exaggerate or don't understand how little privacy we actually get with our existing payment rails. And actually, the public blockchain is not that unsafe. So a lot of people instantaneously default. And I was at Bonian, I was at UBS, and we always defaulted to private blockchains because it's scary to go on the public blockchain. I get that. But don't dismiss it. I think ultimately, the future is the public blockchains because of the economies of scale. We will miss out on many of the advantages. And the banks that don't move to public blockchains, I think in the end will have to, having wasted a lot of money. Just bear that in mind. So, all right, wonderful world, nirvana, with a caveat. And the caveat is, and this is a quote from NIST, the Institute of Security, because there's no central administrator on this platform, there's no one to call when you lose your private key. And think of private key as a very long password. If you lose that password, there's no one to call, literally. I believe it was at Spider-Man, or one of the movies. With great power comes great responsibility. It's exactly that, yeah? There's no one anyone to, wipe your bottom when you get something wrong. If you make the transaction, you transfer something incorrectly, done, money gone. There is no one to kind of handhold you through this process. It's extremely invigorating. It allows you to do stuff like you can do with your cash money in your pocket. Sometimes you don't want anybody to know what you're doing, and for completely legitimate reasons. But it is scary. And as the number of, the value of the assets under custody went from it being worth 10,000 to 100,000 to a million to 100 million, now you're getting crypto billionaires and net asset value USD. People started putting guns to their head and started stabbing them because what they were doing is demanding the passwords. And people started getting increasingly worried about that. And then they started calling me up and saying, can you provide us with a custody solution? So safekeeping, what do we mean by custody solution for digital assets? You're no longer custodying records. That's on a public blockchain. It's highly, highly kind of decentralized and very resilient. What you're doing is effectively safekeeping keys. Imagine I'm a car park valet, you give me your keys to the car and I keep them safe. That's pretty much it. It's pretty basic. It's quite complicated technically, but conceptually it's not particularly complicated. And why is it? You think, how easy is it to use the password? But remember, how many times have you had to call somebody to reset your password? Quite a few. What if the consequence of having to reset the password is you losing 100 million? Happy with that? £10? Yeah, 100 million. No. You don't want to lose that. You say, I'll write it down. Well, paper degrades. CDs degrade. DVDs degrade. USB sticks degrade. You lose them. So keeping them safe is really important, but very difficult. Not only do they could just degrade and you get lost, you can be attacked physically or through cyber attack. It was interesting. I was in Davos this year, and a young gentleman came up to me and he was telling me, why are you doing this custody rubbish? I've got my Ledger Nano, it's a hardware wallet right in my neck. I'm good. I'm like, which hotel are you staying in? And half an hour later, he came back and said, I'm buying your technology. Point is, people get scared. Thank you. So anyway, the other problem, of course, is I talked about not only can you lose the keys or they get degraded or stolen, because the transactions are irreversible, it's a pretty good idea to have safeguards. And it becomes even more important when the account or the assets are shared by not a human being, but a corporate body. Yeah, because usually there's a corporate treasurer, there's approval rules, and so on. But if you've got the private key, you can do whatever the heck you want to do. So it's also important to kind of provide safeguards for transfers, and that's kind of what we help with as well. And then the dream was that everyone runs their own Bitcoin node. And that's a nice dream, but the reality is most people want just to use your iPhone, and they don't want to put gigs and gigs of data on their phone and crunch the numbers. They just don't. Maybe one day, but for now, most people just want a simple solution, and they don't want to be able to have to worry about installing 10 different applications because each one is different for each different blockchain to manage their money. It's just too difficult. And then there's the KYC, AML, and the weird kind of regulation coming in. So how do people manage that today? Started off with one of those things. It's called Paper Wallet. It's great. You basically literally print out your password. It's in a QR code. You put it in a safe. It's great until the paper degrades or the safe kind of gets nicked. Software wallets. And useful, software in your application, but actually your phones are relatively easy to hack. Now, the newer phones are actually a lot better. They have something called a secure element. Your iPhone has a secure element. It's very hard to tamper with it. Once the key is in there, no one's been able to take them out. Unfortunately, all the secure elements on iPhones and Samsungs, probably the best phones, comply with the NIST curve standard. Bitcoin and Ethereum doesn't, because they don't trust the American government that set the standard. They think the NSA is snooping on them, so they chose the wrong curve. So the problem there is, of course, you no longer can take advantage of the security on your phone. You have to now kind of take the risk and use software, not hardware, hardening of your keys. So people came up with these things. They're called hardware wallets. So it's basically a secure element, very kind of secure chip. It's very hard to get the private keys out of them. And then in a physical form, really good piece of kit, yeah? You carry it with you. Problem is, what happens when you lose it? And, well, the answer is simple. You lose your assets. And there are no safeguards. Try doing this institutionally with those keys. Yeah, it's next to impossible. So a lot of people actually ended up putting money on their trading accounts. So there are exchanges like Coinbase and others. Problem with those guys, they are trading accounts. Nobody would, in their right mind, would actually put their savings with E-Trade, a trading account. You go, well, of course not. It's not interest-bearing. There's no protection on it. Yet actually a lot of people do exactly that with their crypto accounts. And because those exchanges are unregulated, there are quite a few anecdotal evidences. They trade with the money that you put on the account. And if they win, great. If you lose, you lose. So be careful about putting that on the exchanges. And then there's this idea of cold storage. I love cold storage. You look at a lot of the websites. Usually it's a Swiss mountain, high up, maybe even a satellite, maybe a little bit of quantum computing too. And sorry, I'll apologize to Lee afterwards. And there's this myth that somehow if you keep your computer offline, it's called air-gapped, everything is fine because you've got this guy, he takes a USB stick and he walks to the vault and he sticks it in the computer and then he creates the signature and he walks back to the office, sticks it in the office and all is good. And then I say, well, hold on. So it's not really air-gapped because the human being is just a very slow network pipe. And I'm going to hack that human being because that human being has children. And I'm going to look and find his children. And I'm going to ask him nicely to do whatever I feel like to do that. Actually, the number of people that can hack a human being is pretty much anyone with a baseball bat. Number of people that can break cryptography is probably 10, 15 people in the world, and they're highly paid. So think about that. So I'm not a believer in cold storage. It's great theater, but I think it's just that. So what do we do? Well, I've been in banking all my life, so I kind of go back to basics. We offer two things. We offer personal and business accounts. So, and these are key custody accounts. The difference between personal and business is usually pretty simple. Personal, you only do individual KYC, and usually have far less sophisticated needs around multi-sig and around all the controls you would expect for corporate treasury or asset management solutions. Business ones, it's corporate onboarding because the soon-to-be ratified amendment to the 4th AML directive now has this concept of a custodial wallet provider, and basically you now have to do KYC AML around about 2020 if you do what I do, which is custodial wallet. So we already do that because we're getting ready for it. So, and business here, I include institutional clients. So right now you'll see like weird terms about, well, we have a lot of family office clients. We have a lot of guys who've done ICOs, need to keep the money somewhere. Miners who earn the network fees, users as well, and then exchanges and increasingly custodians, proper custodians, not key custodians like we are starting to reach out. And what we do very simple stuff. We keep your keys safe. When we receive a transaction from you, what we'll do is we'll verify the transaction because we basically you sign the transaction with the key on your phone. We validate that that's the right signature. We throw away that signature, we apply our signature and submit it to the blockchain. Because we use the phone and because we split the signatures, we can now use the secure element on the phone, so it's much safer. And we also now have a lot of metadata that we receive about you. Literally, I can now tell on the phone whether you're holding it with your left hand or with your right hand. I can also tell you if you're in China, in India, or UK. So now I can have programmable rules, safeguards, to say that if your behavior has altered, but your transaction amount is really high, I'm going to block the transaction, and I'm going to give you a call. And I'm going to do biometric identification because something's gone wrong. You were 5 minutes ago in China, now you're in India, you're holding the phone with the hand that you usually don't hold with it. Might be all okay, and you just had a joyride, but unlikely. We operate trusted nodes, and now, whilst we get rid of a lot of the corporate actions, because basically a lot of the corporate actions are automated within the code of the digital asset, which is pretty cool. We now have the equivalent of mergers or demergers of blockchains. Because basically blockchains are voluntary collections of people to a large degree. Sometimes they have fights, just like couples. And they split. And when they split, you now have effectively two databases. And that's called the fork, ultimately. So now you've got two when you had one. So you have to handle that because you now need to be able to deal with that. And then other kind of scenarios are what's called airdrops. So people try to incentivize and pump and dump. No, I didn't say that. Pump their kind of utility tokens. So they send a load for free. You create a frenzy. Everyone wants a little bit more, pumps up the price. I'm hoping that these practices will go away soon, but you still have to deal with this. This is like a kind of simplified version of what we do. This is a pattern that I think will become quite kind of common. We have the custody account. You can either use your phone or use an API. You create an instruction. You sign the instruction with the key. We then perform safeguards. So this could be geo-blocks. Yeah. So for instance, we say we will only accept the transaction if it was created within these 4 walls, within a few meters accuracy. And then we effectively send that transaction, and what we do is validate all that and re-sign it with the real keys and their custody. We use something called programmable hardware security modules. Hardware security modules are tamper-proof. They're pretty awesome. Basically, they've got mercury switches. So if you move them or try to pull them out, they self-destroy. Mission impossible. There's no smoke, though. Just kind of the bits and bobs kind of get deleted. We put them in safe data centers. So now you have physical security and you've got cyber security. This device has been around for about 30 years in various versions. No one's been able to crack them. So they're pretty safe. But the bit of the transaction where we strip away your signature and put our signature on is very scary, because that's the bit when the hackers would get us. And that's why we use something called programmable HSMs. So this is where the code goes into the same safe space as keys. So essentially what we've done is we've taken the human being, the cold storage guy who walks along to the vault and does all of this. We've codified him and put them inside this hardware security module. And the only way you can change that individual is if you have 3 keys out of 5 and you have access to the data center. It's pretty hard to break that. There's no single-man dependency. And that's what we do, and that's the brave new world. We keep keys. Thank you, guys.
Are there any questions before Alex leaves the stage? I think that was a very wide-reaching... Oh, there's a question here. Sorry, yes.
What is your key differentiator with the ledger vault?
Well, since they haven't published what they're doing, I can't tell you yet. But yeah, it'll be similar, I guess, setup. There will be a correlation of services. What's the difference between Boney and Northern Trust? Eventually, very little.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that was a... Oh, sorry, there's one question at the back here as well, please. Was 1 to 2. Oh, sorry. You have the mic first? Yeah, do it first. Sorry.
My question would be to your individual customer, if somebody pulls a gun to his head and you prefer not to run the transaction because it seems not to be an accurate one, don't you think his security will still be at risk, and perhaps you would have preferred to lose his money?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I cannot protect. I am not your bodyguard. It's a typical kind of scenario where what we guarantee, as much as we possibly can, that our systems are not compromised. If you are individually compromised, we hopefully can detect that. But if you send us what is ultimately a legitimate transaction, we will execute that. There are various number of emergency modes you can trigger if you're brave. The reason I say it's brave, because if people who are trying to steal your money actually bother checking, they might do bad stuff to you. But more than often they're in a rush, so you probably will get away with it.
Hi, Alex, over here.
Hello.
At the end. Yep. Hi. I work for a company called Rivets in the States, a cybersecurity company. Kind of does something similar. We generate and encrypt the private keys on the secure enclave. You mentioned that. And then we split them and put half of it on the SIM chip together with the telcos. Is that something that you've looked into? Because the telcos also contain a lot of personal data, as you mentioned, and then you add policies and rules to the private keys and such, which is exactly what we do, ensuring the integrity of the data, right, before being pushed.
Look, I think you're going to see a huge amount of convergence here, because what's a digital asset? We always think of it as fiat money or security, but actually your lease, your train ticket, anything becomes a digital asset, because I can sell that. And nowadays, I don't know, you guys use Revolut in Ireland here? It's great, yeah? 30 currencies and now Bitcoin. I no longer care, my payment method is no longer dependent on the underlying asset. It's so easy to pay in real time and convert in real time and do private discovery that actually I don't need money anymore. I literally hold a lot of stuff in Bitcoin and then Revolut does an FX, and I pay for it straight away. So I think we're going to see a lot more people choosing to hold assets in different ways and then pay with your train ticket that you no longer use. And then you start to converge, what's DocuSign, if not a digital signature kind of thing? But actually DocuSign is very weak on provenance. So I think you will see digital identity, digital signing, private keys, digital asset custody, all going to start to converge. And that's why I say the shift is really, really big, because the traditional definition of a custodian just doesn't make sense anymore, because there's a separation of what the token gives you, the rights, and how you manage the token. And you start to unbundle that, and that changes the rules of the game.
Hi.
One more.
Yeah, sorry. I suppose back to the UBS smart bonds, which was about 2 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
The World Bank issued a Bondi, blockchain-linked bond in the last few weeks, and I was wondering, why has it taken 2 years more to see the idea of these smart bonds come to more fruition, and when will people put more trust in the blockchain itself?
I think 2 years is pretty fast, to be honest. It's only 2 budget cycles.
What's holding people, let's say, back from investing in the smart bonds that you kind of created back then?
Because you now need to, look, I remember running a legal hackathon back at the level 39 lab I used to run. We were sitting there and going, Christ, if something goes wrong and we have to go to court, would court accept blockchain as the evidence base? Just nobody knew. We stood there, it was like, I don't know, will the judge accept it or not? So we had to start pushing through and go through. Most of the stuff I was doing like everybody else did. I wasn't doing tech, I was doing legal. I was sitting there going to the lawyers, if this happens, will I get sued or not? And that just takes a lot of time. If you start talking to the FCA and others, the cycles are slow. It's just, I think 2 years is incredible. I know that sounds kind of, I'm trying to be facetious, I'm not. 2 years is pretty fast. The fact that we're now starting to see kind of real-world regulated bonds and blockchain, it's incredible, just 2 years. We talk about fax machines taking so long, I think it's a blink of an eye. So I get the impatience, but look, I'm going to make a lot of money if loads of it transfers to it. So I'm just as impatient as anybody else. But yeah, I think it's pretty fast. It's just a function of how long it takes to do that kind of stuff.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Alex. That was a really interesting, wide-ranging talk before you got to custody. And also, I did like the idea that you compared the 4 days settlement with 12 seconds. And we're totally hung up on that 12-second, execution of the transaction per second. And you think it's 4 days normally, so very impressive. The one word of warning, though, if I see you coming towards me with a baseball bat, I'm not telling you what hotel I'm going to.
Okay, deal.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Very
Thanks
interesting.
very much.